welcome back to another episode of Buffalo Happy Hour. Mike, what's up?
You always throw it to me immediately.
Of course.
All right, sounds
Why
fine.
not?
That's fine. So we are up at Addie's once again, and we have a prestigious guest. So we're excited to dive into anything that you want to. Let me just loosen that for you so you can drop your mic.
There you go.
Okay,
Just
retighten. Good deal.
Go. Great.
So, Addie's, thank you so much for allowing us to do this, not only here, but also in front of a impromptu live audience. So that's super exciting. But thank you for coordinating this as well, just because it's tremendous for us just to be able to sit down and kind of pick your brain and go over pretty much your life and day to day. So we'll start with introductions and titles so that the guests know who we're talking to, and then we'll jump right into it.
Sure. So I'm Steve Beam from Limestone Branch Distillery, and our flagship brand is Yellowstone Kentucky Straight Bourbon.
This brand is so cool because I think, especially, has it grown since the Yellowstone TV show? Because I feel like people see it on other shelves and you're like, oh my God, that's sweet, but it's not related.
It's not related at all, but it has grown from the show.
Yeah.
But, Yellowstone has been around as long as the park, 1872, so it's 153 years now.
So how did you guys get your name into it?
So originally, my great-uncle had a distillery, and when they opened the park, they branded one of their bourbons Yellowstone.
So speak on the elephant in the room. We heard your last name, but let's just start there.
All right. We can start there. and my last name's Beam, and I go back to Jacob Beam, like all the distilling Beams in Kentucky. What people hear when they hear the name Beam, they automatically think of my cousins who have another distillery down the road from us who sell a little bit of whiskey, and but there's a lot to the family tree and a lot to the family story. Actually, Jacob Beam came to Kentucky in 1792. He sold his first whiskey in 1795, and then he had 3 grandchildren that were all master distillers, all had their own distilleries. And that set 3 distinct lines in our family tree. There's a gentleman named John Henry Beam. They called him Jack. And he was the youngest of those grandchildren. And he was actually the most successful of all. He had a massive distillery in just outside of Bardstown. Very successful, dabbled in politics, was very gregarious. He had 1 son, and unfortunately they both died young. He died in his 50s, and I think his son died the year after he did. And they were actually very close to our side of the family as well.
Oh, it's a shame.
So that ended that line of the Beams at that point. His brand was Early Times. A lot of people don't realize that Early Times goes back to the Beam family as well.
Oh, wow.
But that was his brand. And then it was sold a few times, and now I think it's owned by Sazerac. But and then the middle grandson was David, and that was Jim Beam's father, and everybody knows that story. And our ancestor was Joseph, who was the oldest of that generation. He had a small farm distillery. We recently uncovered where he bought his father's still. So David, his father, his still came to our side of the family. But it was a small family farm distillery. And he had 2 sons, Minor Case Beam and Joel Beam. Minor Case was my great-grandfather, and Minor Case went to work for his Uncle Jack when he was 14, and when he was 28, he became a master distiller. He was known as a master distiller and bought into and then would eventually buy his own distillery.
So you said that your great-grandfather bought the distiller or the still from David?
So it was Jacob, David, and then David had 3 sons, Jack, David, and Joseph.
Okay.
So the names repeat themselves over and over again, so it's very confusing.
Because it's a pot still, right?
It was a pot still at that time, yeah.
What was that like? Because there wasn't too many back then.
We don't have any details other than David died young as well. He died without a will, and his property was sold at the courthouse steps on the Washington County, Kentucky courthouse, and there's a record of that sale.
That's sweet.
Wow.
So that's how we saw that he bought the still. The Willits bought some whiskey, actually. So
That's pretty crazy.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. So I don't know if it's like every other family business, and for your sake, but how did you get involved, and what age did you start?
I grew up around the business. I had always, it was fascinating to me, and I always felt that our side had ended rather abruptly with Prohibition, and then so I was always very interested. But when I was coming of age, so to speak, my bourbon was kind of hitting the skids. It was on a downward spiral, and it was not looking good. So that, coupled with the fact that I talked to my dad and I was like, I wouldn't mind being a master distiller. And he's like, well, nowadays all those master distillers have chemical engineer degrees. And I was like, well, that's not going to happen. So, so I went on and pursued my other passion, which was horticulture and plants. I was a landscape architect from Purdue and practiced landscape design for many years, and but always kept coming back, and had always wanted to get back into the distilling business. But actually, the laws and everything were, even as bourbon became more popular, the laws and just structure of the system were against small distilleries.
Sure. So you graduate from Purdue, you're a landscape architect for a while, and then you slowly start working your way into the family business, we'll call it.
Right.
What was your first role?
Right out of the bat, I just opened the distillery. But I did.
It's a pretty big move.
Yeah, it's an easy first role, obviously.
Yeah.
Everybody's first step.
Yeah, it was. In the meantime, from being in the landscape business to when I moved back to Kentucky, I was in the restaurant business with my brother, and but I was like, looked at my brother. I was like, it's either now or never. We're not getting any younger, so we jumped, and as guys said, to jump without and just hope that the parachute opens. And it's kind of amazing, the journey that we've had. But I didn't know a lot about the business. I like I said, I had a lot of cousins and aunts and uncles and everybody involved in it, so I knew kind of a surface amount.
Sure.
But boy, did I get a quick learning curve. But I went and worked with a few small distilleries at that time. There weren't very many. I think when we opened, we were in the low 200s of small distilleries in the country.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, and those first meetings with the ADI, the distilling group, were really fun with great people. But, yeah, so I didn't really have experience like that, so I went to small distilleries, got that. And then some of the distillery engineers in the big distilleries from Kentucky really didn't understand the scale that we were doing at, because we were doing mash of, just under 100 gallons at a time. And we had a 150-gallon pot still. So very, very small scale. And those guys are used to doing 20,000 gallons at a time. Sure. And it doesn't, it's not a...
Different equations.
Yeah, it doesn't, yeah. And so where I really got a lot of help were families that had been in the moonshining business.
Oh, okay.
They had made moonshine because they worked at that scale. And they were able to really give me a lot of tips. And one of the gentlemen who helped me the most was that, his family had been moonshining, and he went on to consult distilleries as well, but he understood what it was to distill at a 150-gallon still.
Did you start selling moonshine before you got into the brown stuff?
Our first spirit was moonshine.
Okay.
Yeah, that we sold corn whiskey, a white corn whiskey, and then a clear moonshine.
Is it similar recipe to what you're doing now? Because you're pretty on the scale of corn, aren't you like around 70 or something?
75%.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, no, it was a 50%. This was a true moonshine, old Kentucky moonshine, and it was we still use the same 75, 13, 12,
Sure.
but we added sugar in as well.
Oh, okay.
Because it was a moonshine, so we added sugar to boost that alcohol content.
That's super common in Puerto Rico, too. They make like white lightning out of sugar cane because it's prevalent down there.
Right.
But it makes it really, really delicious.
Right.
That's actually, I don't know. I want to try that now. That makes me thirsty.
But you got the corn, flavor.
Yeah.
Actually, from it was not a cooked mash. It was just you heated it, but you boiled water, put it into the corn and then added the sugar in.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was not like a traditional cooked mash.
Do you still sell it to this day or no?
No. We discontinued that. We do all of our. We have a very small production. Everything's devoted to bourbon now.
Sure.
So the moonshine route eventually led to what is now today Yellowstone.
Right.
Correct. Okay.
Right.
So the Yellowstone brand, like we started with, for some odd reason, you're just all excited looking at labels and getting thirsty.
Well, yeah, dude. Sweet.
Yeah, I totally get
we
it.
should pour some at some point.
I'm down.
Right now. Let's do it. So you guys have a fairly expansive lineup, and initially when Yellowstone first kind of came to Addie's, Tyler was barking up a tree about it. No free shout outs, but Tyler's doing his thing, and he's like, you should probably try this. And we're like, okay, sounds good. And we did. And it was before the takeoff. It was obviously before the show as well. But I remember trying it, and my first thought was, this is fairly flexible. I feel like you could do it a multitude of different ways. You could, if you wanted to, you can make a Manhattan with it. A lot of people that go to our whiskey classes at Addie's always talk to us about Manhattans. We always talk about Manhattans, but we're trying to find almost like the perfect spirit for it. It's like an ongoing 2-year joke at this point. But that was a conversation that we had. And then obviously Derek and I always try things neat. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be a coffee liqueur. We're trying it neat. And then it kind of branched out into, I'm excited to see what else they do. And then the SKUs just kept coming. Mm-hmm. So where are you guys at now with the brand? Because from what we've seen as a consumer, and not just fans of like a show that has no impact on your juice outside of people think that it's the same thing, even though it's not.
Right.
What has really happened over the past couple of years?
So the past few years we have grown tremendously. And then also we started adding the distillers, our finish collection, which is what I've been pushing that for a while, and it just, stars weren't aligned properly. So it was great to finally get that out. For the Yellowstone Select, which is the first one you had talked about, that's one of the things that I talk about extensively, is that it is a great workhorse. Mm-hmm. You can drink it neat on the rocks, or it stands up nicely in a cocktail as well. Mm-hmm. For me, it's a very traditional Kentucky straight bourbon.
Thanks for sharing it with us.
Oh, cheers.
Thanks for being on the show. This is awesome.
So how long did you have this moonshine sitting there and you're like, okay, now let's start transitioning into bourbon? And then how long did this last in the barrel before you decided it would be a good time to pull it out?
Okay, so this is not our moonshine recipe. So we did the moonshine up. We always made a little bit of bourbon because that's what business we wanted to be in. So we were always making bourbon. We had to pay bills. And then in 2015, we partnered with Luxco, who had bought the Yellowstone brand back in the 90s. And they really weren't doing much with it. And but I wanted one of the old family brands to bring back into the family. Sure. So in 2015, we partnered with them. And then I was able to use their stock of bourbon to formulate the Yellowstone Select, which is what we're tasting today.
And that's when you modified the percentages, correct?
Yes.
Because you never got the engineering degree, but you just forced your way into being a head distiller anyways.
Right.
Love that.
Yeah. And, I in the very beginning, that's one of the reasons we started with the small still, the 150-gallon still. A lot of people don't realize in 2010, when I was starting, there were very few options for stills, glassware, all that. It was still a nascent industry, and not catered to small distilleries at all. So I actually built some of our original equipment, and then had built some of our original equipment. And the pot still that we used was very rudimentary, where everything was controlled by levers, and so it was all taste,
nice,
and smell. And I humble enough to say that I didn't to know what I didn't know, and I wanted to have a still that I could actually learn. I didn't want something where I could program, because there were a few that you could program.
Sure.
As no, I want to know how this operates. I want to understand. That was the whole idea of being a distiller. Is I want to understand this. I would have loved to have been able to sit with my grandfather and talked to him about it, but that wasn't going to happen. I had notes of his, and
were there other? Because this is technically a family. Before Luxco bought it, right? It was still within the family. Did the other cousins try to purchase this at all? Like, was there ever any? Is there ever any feud between the families at all because of you both in the same industry, or is it kind of family reunions are just crazy?
No, I mean it wasn't. Well, the Dants had some legal issues with each other, but and that is the whole thing. This is not the Beam side of the family. This is my mother's side of the family, the Dants. So J.W. Dant and his first son, Bernard Dant, started head of the distillery that became Yellowstone, and then they married into my dad's family, and so it became both of the families involved in Yellowstone.
Wow,
So
it's pretty crazy.
And before we started recording, you were talking about the family recipe, which is a specific mash that you recently named. So with these new products, are you still using that base recipe and then you're just working on finishes?
Yes.
Okay. And then now that the finishes have arrived and they're available to the market, which is amazing, essentially what is... it's a tough question. Like, what is your mark that you want to do as a distiller? Because there's a lot of people that distill for a brand, and they're like, I want to do something. Devil's River is a perfect example. He's got like Distiller Select. So he's like, this is exactly what I want this product to taste like, and then I'm going to find a barrel that does that, and I'm not going to release it until I do. Are you trying that sort of concept, I guess, for lack of better words, with Yellowstone?
I like to try different things.
Yeah.
So, and that's how the Special Finishes collection evolved. And, I have an experimental warehouse and where we do things in 15-gallon barrels so that they age a little bit more rapidly. A couple of years, I can see where things are headed. And so I've tried different kinds of malt. We've done things with chocolate malt and caramel malts, more the brewers type of malts that are more familiar with beers. We did a wheated recipe, which we're about to release with the Bardstown collection next week, I believe.
Nice.
So, which was a recipe that came out of a Dant family notebook. So it was a 28% wheat, 12% malt, and 60% corn.
Nice.
Wheated bourbon. So we did do some wheated. So I try different things, and one of the things that I talk about speaking to my grandfather, but at the same time it's kind of nice that I was a little bit held back, because as we spoke about before with the finish, when we first came out with finish, it was kind of a taboo subject in Kentucky. It was kind of frowned upon by the old guard. And my dad always said my grandfather made whiskey one way, his way, and that was it. So, but we've always, I like to play and do different things.
Sure. What was your go-to whiskey before you got into the business?
Oh wow! When I first came of age, my drink of choice was a 7 and 7, if you can believe that. And my dad said my grandfather rolled over in his grave every time I drank one. And then I tried Maker's Mark, and I was like, oh, this is nice. I can sip on this. This is great. So I did Maker's Mark, and then I started getting more into the rye bourbons, and so yeah. And
isn't there beam ties at Maker's Mark or like
yes,
back?
So Beam bought Maker's Mark. Wow, back in a while ago, and then they were bought by Suntory.
That's right.
Yeah, that was crazy. Wild. Yeah, when that news dropped, everyone was just kind of like, "Wait, what?" So with you being as involved as you are, do you have a ritual when you're tasting barrels, or if you're trying to do some sort of release? Do you have to be in a certain mindset? Do you have to eat something before you taste?
I do have to. I do have to be in a certain mindset, which is very difficult to say what that is, because I travel a lot, so a lot of times samples are chasing me around the country or the world.
Yeah.
But I'll sit down, and it just has to feel right, and I don't know what to say other than that. I just have to feel like I can taste it and do a great job with it.
There's some research that says like the time of day too really depends on how you're tasting things. Like the morning, your tongue is so fresh. All you basically have is toothpaste if you're not gross, but like all you have is toothpaste on your tongue, and then that's what kind of will dictate how you taste things in the morning. And then after, once you've had your everything bagel toasted with cream cheese or whatever, it's going to taste different. So do you have a specific time of day that you try to taste things, or not necessarily?
Generally, when I taste, it's usually late morning or late afternoon.
Okay.
Do you have to wear certain clothes? Relaxed fit?
Whatever is comfortable, because
Makes
I'm
sense.
usually doing that at home or in a office. So I'm just whatever is comfortable at that time. Yeah.
So the first finished product that you released, because this is what you really enjoy, is finished whiskey. What was the first one that you did? We have a couple up here.
So the first one we did actually was for our limited edition, which was in 2016, and that was a toasted barrel.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so it was our 2016 toasted barrel. That was my first finished whiskey ever, actually.
That's ahead of the curve, isn't it?
It was ahead of the curve.
By like 3 years.
Yeah, it was way ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
And I really wanted to do this then, and like I said, things happen. But anyway, so then the 2017 we used that same toasted barrel because I was like, okay, that's interesting. And like I said, I'm trying to learn and discover things. So we took, when those barrels were emptied, we sent them back to the cooper, and they charred the inside of that barrel. So we did a number 1 char on top of the toasted barrel, and that became our 2017.
Oh, cool.
And
what did you pull out of the 2017 barrel when you were tasting it?
It was a very, very soft, elegant whiskey, and it was one like a lot of people seek after now that they can't find, that they're always looking for. But it's just a very, very easy, soft whiskey.
Sure.
And then 2018 was the very soft one, which was that same barrel with the number 3 char. Oh. And the 2017 was more like with a creme brulee, had more burnt sugar notes. Sorry about that. Yeah.
No worries.
But that's the way that was. Yeah.
It must have been delicious because obviously you get a lot of like the marshmallow and like some butter, but not much, depending on the mash.
Right.
With toasted, so it's exciting to kind of re-char it.
Yeah, that re-charring of that one was great, and then the number 3 char over the whole thing again from the wet barrel was it just made it like super soft. I was expecting it to be a little bit more of those toasted marshmallow notes and everything came out, but it just mellowed it so much. I think it was because of so much charcoal.
Did it shift to like caramel?
There was more caramel and just very, very soft. The 17 had a tad of a bite to it, which I actually liked.
So we said the toasted was way before the time. What made you want to do that, I guess? Were you looking for something in your whiskey that you couldn't find?
I was just wanting, at that time, I was trying to figure out how the barrel contributed to whiskey.
Okay.
And how different levels of char or toast or what the wood was actually contributing. And I thought the toast would be more true to what the wood is contributing than necessarily the char.
Are you able to say where you source your barrels from? What cooperage?
We source from several, but those particular barrels came from Calvin Cooperage, the very first toasted barrels.
Nice. Okay.
In Louisville. How
did you first hear about toasted?
I'm not sure. Honestly, I'm not. There at that time, I was in an industry group called American Distilling Institute, and a lot of the small craft distillers got together at functions and things and threw out ideas and talked over things, and so I'm not really sure, honestly. But I know I wanted to learn about wood.
Yeah,
in
exactly.
The barrel.
Yeah, I wonder if someone's going to step forward and be like, "I was there for the first conversation of toasted."
Well, what is going to be the next thing? You have charred, you have toasted. Is there going to be a new thing that comes out with barrels that are going to reinvent?
I don't know if it's the barrels, but you can also speak to this too. But a lot of people are starting to say that the American single malt is going to be the next, like, because wheated came and passed. So now they're starting to really focus on the American single malt. What are your thoughts on that?
I think American single malt is a great new category. I think that people were really excited about it. You know, a year and a half ago when the TTB was going to come out with the rules and podcast and whiskey geeks were really excited about it. And so a lot of people came out with their new single malts. But then the TTB dropped the ball, and we're still waiting for the standards. And I think it kind of slowed the momentum a little bit.
Oh, 100%.
You know, I think once they come out with standards and we know what we've gotten, I think that it will pick up again.
That makes sense, because I didn't even realize that that's what happened.
Yeah.
I just thought people weren't able to figure out how to do it correctly or how to do it to the standard from a tasting perspective that they wanted. And that's why any distilleries never released an American single malt. There's been like two.
You just don't want to pull it back off the shelf if the TTB finally comes out and says, this is the standard. And you're like, oh, crap, I got all this whiskey on the shelves that I have to pull back because now it's not even legal anymore.
Right. Well, if you had done it, you'd probably be grandfathered in. But, you know, but at the same time, you don't want to have a lot of things.
Yeah, maybe, because that's a huge risk.
Right.
That's a lot.
But we do have an American single malt. So, and it's done to what we would consider the highest standard that they would have, you know, with a new, we make it basically the same way we make bourbon.
Okay.
Except that it's 100% malted barley.
What's its proof?
It's 108 proof.
108.
Yeah.
It's probably delicious.
Yeah, it is. If you like to try something,
Of course.
certainly try it.
Of course.
So you
I like to say that it's, you know, it's not that any of that 40 ABV, kiss your mom and go to tea stuff. This is American single malt. 108 proof.
Let the eagles fly. I love that.
So after the toasted, is this what you got into, or did you try to experiment more with the toasted and that regular bourbon mash bill finish in other like Cab Sauv barrels?
The after the toasted in the 3 different barrels, then I did an extra aged whiskey limited edition, which was a 9-year age stated with different ways. Then we did. I've done. Let's see, Armagnac, I think was his next one, and Marsala wine cask, and but
a lot.
Several. I'll think of the other one here in a second, but several different finishes. So and it's fun. It just I always try to do it with a light touch because I don't want to overpower the bourbon.
Sure.
But I just want to kind of add some notes that you wouldn't necessarily find.
So you said you touched on like the requirements that you believe that this is. If they did change things, how would you think that they would? Would it be like an age statement on it?
Age statement, you know, we're not sure if they're going to allow, you know, new cooperage or used cooperage. You feel pretty certain that they're going to allow new.
Sure.
Not so certain about used, although that's kind of the standard with single malt.
Yeah.
So I would think that they would. You know,
This smells extremely fresh and almost floral a little bit.
Yeah.
I love the color on it though.
Yeah.
And it's not super like, it's not really viscous. Like it's not.
This smells fantastic.
Yeah. It's clean.
Are you consistent with like the char that you put on most of the barrels?
This is a number 3 char.
Number 3.
Yeah,
Okay.
and most of it is.
Well, cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks for letting us try this.
Yeah.
I notice on all the tops of them you have 7th generation family distillery, but I don't see the word beam on here at all. Was that purposeful that you wanted to build your own brand and not necessarily capitalize on the name?
And we don't want to be sued, but
That's fair.
Yeah, I'm sure there's some element of that.
But I mean, it would,
It's like
if you
know what
said
you're talking about.
if you said like Steve Beam related to the Beam Distillery, that wouldn't necessarily get you sued, would it?
Oh, there's,
Probably.
You know,
There's bylaws, Derek.
you can sue anybody for anything.
That's fair.
And at some point, it depends on who has the most money to follow it through.
Yeah.
So, you know, and I want to respect them, but I also want to share what we do.
Sure.
You know, and I do want to make my own way. You know.
Yeah.
The name's great. You know, it's opened a lot of doors, but at the bottom line is you still have to make a great product.
Yeah.
No, good on you. They had we asked the
great.
audience. Yeah, it is. We asked the audience if they could just, take some time and brainstorm some questions. There was one question that came in that was kind of, we can chuckle at, but how was it growing up? Like in school, did everybody ask, are you, is that who you are? Because it happened to me. My last name's Kelly. So growing up in Buffalo, everyone's like, is your Uncle Jim Kelly? I'm like, no. Like, I've no one in my family that treats their wife like that, but, neither here nor there. So how was that experience for you?
But it was Kentucky, so the names of the distillers are
Everywhere. Yeah.
So you can't swing a dead cat and not hit a distiller in Kentucky, but it's just so it wasn't really. But people would say, "Are you related to Jim Beam?" And at that time in my life, it was like not really, somewhere, but not really.
Right.
They're not in that family. My dad always said that. They were bonded and we were blended, but
That's amazing. That's amazing. That's awesome. So, out of these 4 that we have in front of us, what are you most proud of so far?
that is wow. That's a really good question.
I just noticed that Minor Case is your
My great-grandfather.
Yeah, your great grandfather. So,
Right.
I mean, that one's really cool just because it's different from the Yellowstone name. Was that obviously that was intentional, right?
Right, because that's our rye.
Okay.
That's that is only rye, and so we wanted to designate that different than the Yellowstone, which is our bourbon, and then we also wanted to pay tribute to Minor Case.
Sure.
For his contribution to the industry.
Absolutely. Yeah. So,
He's still brainstorming.
yeah.
Yeah,
No. Well,
he can't
that's why I
pick one.
asked that question to
I know.
keep that thought going.
I know. He's literally like that pulled on some heartstrings there. I'm sorry, sir.
It's like children or whatever, and people ask me, what do you like? Which one do you like best? And then you're just like, well, it depends on the situation,
Correct.
What I'm doing and what I want. If I want something fruity or if I want something. But actually, the one I'm most proud of probably would have to go back to the original, because that was the first time I had done any sort of blending whatsoever.
Yeah, the parachute opened.
Yeah,
Right.
and I think I did a decent job with
Absolutely.
it.
Yeah,
The sales would indicate that, and I chose the proof 100% on how it tasted. I didn't worry about same thing with the single malt as well.
Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so with the bourbon, I started at just over 100 proof and went to 90 proof, and just added water just a little bit at a time to where I thought the flavor was right, and then proof it, and then that's the proof we went with, and it was 93.
When you were going through that process, because I'm trying to put myself in your shoes, we've tried a lot of juice. We've tried a lot of juice in 5 years, but nowhere near the amount of juice that you've had. Is there one thing where you're like, there's some kick to it, I'm trying to mellow that out, and I'm trying to bring out this side flavor that I'm getting? And it could be, I don't know, something simple. Like, I'm just trying to pull out a little bit more caramel, so I'm going to proof it down, and I'm going to see what 2 last proof points does to bring out that caramel and then reduce that bite. Is that the internal conversation, or is it something else?
All right, I think that's 2 different things. So
That's why you're you.
Yeah. If I'm picking out like a barrel or a single item, then you like this blend, I'm trying to find where that blend works the best.
Okay.
So I'm letting that bourbon speak to me. I'm not saying I'm trying to bring this out or that out. I'm just lowering or raising the proof and letting that whiskey talk.
Sure.
And
You would
then-
do more of the flavor with different barrels, right?
Right. So if I'm doing a blend like for the limited edition, that's where I'll start with a broad selection of what I would say is like a vanilla barrel. It's just like a great bourbon, nothing necessarily outstanding, but it's a great base. Has a great flavor profile.
Yeah.
And then you build on that.
Okay.
So then you add some barrels that have a great nose, and then a mid palate and a nice finish, and so then you start to build from that base, because that's the way I do that, and it's difficult because this barrel may have a great nose, but when you add it into that mix, it completely disappears.
Sure.
So it's not as straightforward as it sounds.
Now you are obviously producing a lot of whiskey. You're selling a lot of whiskey. You're not producing all of it, right?
Correct.
So where are you sourcing? Do you have sourcers that you work with? Are they other Luxco brands?
They are Luxco.
Okay.
And Luxro are sister distillery.
Oh, okay.
So everything comes from there, or MGP as well. We sourced Minor Case, our rye whiskey came from MGP before we were part of MGP, and now it still comes from MGP.
When you were, that's an interesting point, because you said that you were doing a lot of moonshine prior because you have to keep the lights on.
Right.
Was there ever a thought of just saying, we're going to hit day one, MGP product, go completely, this is what our brand is? Or did you kind of want to wait until you had your own juice done so it's your take on your whiskey?
We wanted to do our own take
Okay.
on our own thing.
Yeah.
I love that.
We didn't want, I didn't want a brand. I wanted a distillery.
Sure.
I wanted to be a distiller. I wasn't trying to develop a brand. As I became a distiller and then worked with Yellowstone, then we're working on the brand. But I as a professional, I wanted to learn to be a distiller.
Sure. We have another audience question.
Yes.
Why did you come up with the name Limestone Branch Distillery?
Good question. So, I was working, and obviously couldn't use any of the family names, so those were out. And have to give a little backstory on Branch. So there's an old timers would go into the bars and they would order a bourbon and Branch. Branch being water, stream water.
Interesting.
Bourbon and Branch was a term for bourbon and water. So that's where the branch came from. We had a small little branch stream on the property, so that kind of came there. And then limestone, is just a very significant part of the whole process of making bourbon and filtering the water. And I kind of wanted to be on the label somewhere.
Yeah.
So
That's awesome.
Would you ever take some old family recipes and incorporate, not like things that are confidential, but kind of pay homage to that inside of the label? Like you would pull, like, I don't know, just handwritten notes from grandpa, and then throw that on the back label and then kind of incorporate that.
right. But haven't so far. Honestly haven't. Yeah. But
No worries.
I do.
You have the opportunity.
Right, but we do that. What's in the bottle?
Yes.
We do definitely do that. And even the yeast that we use is a family yeast. My grandfather and Minor Case had a yeast jug. He passed it on to my grandfather, and he passed it on to my uncle, who then donated it to the Oscar Getz Whiskey Museum in Bardstown. And it sat there from the 1980s until we opened up in 2010, 11, and then when we had it scraped on the inside and trying to find the original yeast.
Oh, wow.
And actually, Pat Heist over at Firm Solutions,
Yeah.
Wilderness Trail, they did that. And so they were able to get
Those dudes are super smart.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he said it was one of the scientists who worked on that project that said it was very complicated, and he was really excited to work on that project because they found the DNA and then worked with some kind of put it in a bacteria. It's way above my pay grade, but they were able to use that, and so we used the same DNA, same yeast that our family had used.
So that being said, saying that you're not like that into it with the yeast and everything like that, and you didn't go for that chemical engineering background, do you kind of just like put it in a barrel and see what works? Like, not obviously trying to say it's that simple, but like, is that kind of your approach on making whiskey? Is like, I know what I need to do. Let's put it in a barrel and then I'll figure it out later because it'll taste good, but maybe I'll have to blend it with something else.
No, what I do is try to make the very best distillate that you can possibly make and put it in the best barrel that you can get.
Sure.
And then it really is a lot of up to Mother Nature and letting it, in the rick house, depending on where it sits in the rick house, what is going to happen. What's the barrels are so different. Even a great barrel, manufacturer, you have different woods from different trees in different barrels.
Oh, yeah.
So you can have liquid that goes into the same liquid, distilled at the same time, out of the same batch, go into 2 barrels that were made side by. Well, barrels are kind of shuffled all over the place when they're making them, but 2 barrels from the same that you got in at the same time, and then put into the rick house, one right after each other, and they'll age completely different.
That's what makes it so much fun.
Yeah.
So outside of bourbon, what do you drink other than coffee and water?
That's another fan question right there.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of coffee.
Yeah.
A lot of coffee. I generally drink bourbon, and then we have some gin, which I drank some gin, and that's what led to this. But as far as alcohol, and wine, I'll do. My neighbor's hood, they drink a lot of wine, so I end up drinking more wine than I normally would. But yeah. But
is if it's a Tuesday, your go-to is just have a bourbon and relax?
I do. Yeah.
Understood. Same.
So when did you introduce the gin?
We started that in. Well, we interesting story about when we introduced it. We actually introduced it in New York, in the city here in New York.
Oh.
In January 2020.
How did that go?
Well, it went great for about a month.
Yeah,
because it was on premise. We introduced it on premise in New York, in the city.
Yeah,
January 2020, and
woof.
Yeah. Right. And then life shut down.
And then life shut down.
So what was the motivation behind making the gin? Because clearly your whiskey was successful. Was it just something that you always wanted in your portfolio?
Well, it's kind of funny because I joked when people when we first opened and said, when you open a distillery, a lot of people make white spirits. And they asked about moonshine. I said, well, we were in the South, we made moonshine, but a lot of people make gin just to keep. But we kind of backed into it because, I had my degree in horticulture and was always interested in plants. And you have a still and you have plants and curiosity, and so you start distilling different things. And so we were distilling components of the gin from plants on the distillery at the distillery site. Things like black cherry, blackberries, mulberries, honeysuckle, different things like that. We were experimenting with those, and so that kind of evolved into, well, why don't we put these together? And each of them didn't really stand out on their own, so we kind of put them together as a gin.
When you say was it a team decision to move into gin, or did you wake up on a Thursday and you're like, we should try gin?
It was kind of like that. Yeah.
Okay. So the latter?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I say we, but it's just because I try not to say I too much. But,
Understood.
But I do involve a lot of people, and with tastings and things. So we do have an awesome team at the distillery.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say. What is the staff like there?
It's a great staff. Eric, our lead distiller, he's been there for 10 years. I hired him. He's learned, trained under me, and he's there day to day. He runs the day to day so that I can be out doing things like this. And he's a great guy. We just have a great team. Many people who've been there for a long, long time.
So when it comes to those labels, can you explain a little bit what the difference between a lead distiller and a master distiller is? It kind of sounds self-explanatory, but it's not that easy.
Right. That's a good question, because they're really kind of what you make it. But for us, it's Eric's the lead distiller. He's in charge of all the distillers at the distillery, and then myself being the master distiller, I'm kind of in charge of overseeing all the products, all the new introductions, making sure that things are running, that Eric's got everything under control, and but really working on the new introductions and that as well.
You said things like this regarding your schedule and your day-to-day. What does that look like for somebody who understands, the Beam family's massive, right? And there's branches to it, and then you've forged your own path, which is amazing, especially in today's day and age, especially coming from something that wasn't necessarily whiskey. You literally did something completely different.
Right.
What does your day-to-day look like?
It depends on where I'm at, because I travel a lot. So a lot of days are start in a hotel room and then end up somewhere like this. And as a matter of fact, many days, because I travel about at least two weeks a month. And then, like next week, I'll be in Kentucky. Mm-hmm. So I'll go over things with Eric and the distillers and what's going on there. We're releasing that Bardstown collection, so a lot will be, involved with those events and things like that. So, and then the following week, I'm in Pittsburgh. So,
Nice.
Doing?
Very similar to what we're doing now.
Got it, okay. So just site visits and checking into different markets?
Correct.
That's awesome. Okay.
Yeah.
If someone was to go to a liquor store and see Yellowstone on the shelf, what would you say is the best introduction to what you guys stand for? Is it the bourbon, or would you say like maybe go towards the rum cask finish? Because we haven't talked about the rum at all yet.
Right. And you should try that. Well,
Pop it
actually,
open.
we should try the toasted first.
Okay.
That was our first.
So, disclaimer, I've crushed a bottle of that. I seen it and I'm like, Yellowstone is a toasted? Because it's not, I mean, you have what, Basil Hayden? We did a single barrel with 3-chord that's a local whiskey distillery here, and 80% of our barrel pick was toasted, which was amazing. Thank you for Addie's once again. Shameless plug, but that's fine, for helping us facilitate that entire journey. But I murdered it because I was like, well, okay, like it's toasted. It should be similar. We'll see what it tastes like. No. And then it was 100 proof. And I'm like, that's even better, because
Right.
we're both like, 95 higher. Let's go.
Right.
That's our go-to. I don't know about you, but we love high proof. So,
Yeah.
okay. So talk about the journey on this, specifically the proof.
So the proof, that is where we had to kind of make a happy medium, because we knew we were going to want to keep it standard through the whole finished collection. Mm-hmm. So you kind of see where you think the whiskey speaks the best, and so right at 100 is where that is.
Have you had this?
Yeah. I've
Right.
had
So you
toasted.
guys have had that one, so
Yeah.
we don't have to address that one.
Yeah, I mean-
It's a great one. This one, the toasted, makes a fantastic cocktail, because that extra oak in there just really gives it
Speak my language.
the punch in the cocktail. There's 6 different staves in that toasted, so it's a toasted stave, and 6 different ones, because I didn't want it to be kind of a lot of toasted products that taste are kind of flat, and I wanted it to be very well-rounded and have a lot of depth. And so there's 6 different staves, 6 different toast levels of staves in there to give it a very rich and well-rounded profile.
That's interesting, because we hear char like 1 through 8 or whatever, and 8 the whiskey's basically falling out of the barrel at that point.
Right.
But are there different levels to toast? Because I
Yes.
don't really hear that very often.
Yes.
Okay.
There are different levels of toast, and I honestly don't know what exactly.
Thank you.
Well, there's regular, medium, heavy
Okay.
toast, but each cooper is going to have their own. But these staves that they actually toast, they use infrareds and things to toast these to bring out certain characteristics of the wood. And some things have, notes like coconut, and some things have a spicy note, or some things have vanilla. There's some that you chew on, you taste a piece of wood and it tastes like it's been soaked in vanilla.
Sure.
But it hasn't. It's just the way that wood has been toasted.
That's the first time I've ever heard toasted as low, medium, or high.
Yeah.
I never knew that.
Yeah.
I didn't know the fact that you can toast it based off of what you want to taste.
Yeah.
Like toasting is still very new. I mean, there's still not a lot of distilleries that are doing that. Is it because it's more complex than just setting the thing on fire?
Yes.
Okay.
And how do you put it out? We're still trying to figure that out. It's been 5 years.
So when now there's a difference when this is toasted staves. Okay. And so they run those through like I believe it's like
It's just a massive fire, right?
well, it's like
Probably how you toast bread, dude.
It's kind of like a conveyor oven that they use on a pizza.
Yeah.
But the toasted barrels, now that's a whole different story, because they take that barrel without the ends on it, and they set it there, and then they build little fires inside of it, and then they nurse those fires to toast it to where they want that toast level to be.
That's like my dream job. Just
So it
starting
is like
fires.
very, very specific.
It's interesting though, because there you probably have less control. Like if you just started on fire, you can obviously that's not a lot of control anyway, but you can have the peak of the small burning flame, the center be extremely hot, and then the rest of it being not that burnt. So that has to be interesting.
That's where the experience of the people who do that come
Sure.
into play.
We need to
know
talk to one of those people.
Yeah, it really is amazing to watch them do that because they have this little fire and it's kind of crazy.
They're just shouting to each other like, "Where's the kindling?" It's like, "All right, relax a little bit." That's really cool. This is fantastic. So this is a rum finished one. What made you get into rum? Because we love rum casks.
Yeah. So talk about the rum cask.
So this is a Cuban rum
Okay.
cask. So it's a molasses-based rum. So a really nice
Cuban.
Cuban.
How does that work? We're in America.
Yeah.
Don't we have like weird
Yeah, but
conversations?
it's like a third-party thing.
Oh.
We didn't buy them from Cuba.
Don't put them on blast like this. Dude.
I'm not. I'm just curious.
Yeah. And that's like, who knows? we have partners in Mexico.
So
But
Cuban.
we didn't buy them from Cuba.
So
But it is a Cuban rum cask.
do you have a selection of barrels and you're like, I want this Cuban rum over this?
We use barrel brokers,
Okay.
a barrel broker,
Yeah.
and generally they have a list of barrels that they have available.
Okay.
And so then I get to choose from there. So you have a fairly curated selection of barrels that you can use.
Sure.
And that I can use. So that I go and I'll honestly, a lot of times I'll go to the liquor store and get the spirit, like when we were doing Marsala or Armagnac. I'd go and get some Armagnac and try it and just add it to a little bit of our regular product and kind of see how it's playing together. Mm-hmm. And saying, yes, that works really well, or it doesn't work. And so far, I've not had Calvados. It's just not worked for me.
Okay.
But these did, and that's how I ended up with that.
Rum is really interesting because, and I'm interested to hear your take on this too. We recently had an Islay Scotch that was finished in a rum cask, and both of us agreed that those two don't go very well together.
Right.
Is there a barrel or something that was previously finished in a whiskey barrel that you feel like doesn't go well with a bourbon, or is it more of it's just different age?
Well, like I just said, for me, I couldn't get a Calvados to go with our bourbon.
Yeah.
Might be a bourbon out there that it does. Our bourbon, it does not go. Tequila, I've had a hard time getting that to work.
Sure.
Maybe at some point we can get an extra añejo where that it's kind of working. Whereas the sherry works great. The American cream sherry that we use in a minor case. So
Sherry's the best. I love a sherry
I
cask
know.
finish.
Sherry
whiskey.
casks are awesome.
So
So we're starting to get pressed on time. So we've gone through the gamut, which is amazing. You mentioned your new product coming out next week, and beyond that, what are you looking to accomplish coming up through the remainder of the year and then through 2025?
Oh, well, we have our limited edition, which we just wrapped up, sending it into getting bottled and things, and that will be coming out probably September-ish, and that is actually a first time ever of blending two different finishes together.
Okay.
So it's a cognac and a brandy
Ooh.
that are finished and then blended together.
That's exciting.
That's going to be awesome.
Yeah. So that was my first time ever doing it. I've always wanted to do that. First time doing that. And then we have probably another line extension in the toasted finish yet. I'm not sure that I can say what that is yet, but
no worries.
We do have that coming out, and I stay busy tasting whiskey and talking about whiskey, and
Great job.
it's a darn good job.
The new releases or any news, I'm assuming Yellowstone has its own social media page that everything would be posted on, or like how would somebody be able to be in the know of something that's coming down the line?
Yeah, Yellowstone has their own social media on all the different platforms. Limestone Branch Distillery as well.
Okay.
So limestonebranch.com or Yellowstone.
Awesome.
Perfect.
Well, thank you so much for your time. This is awesome. If you have not tried Yellowstone whiskey yet, you have to go check it out. I mean, it's just, for the story alone, it's awesome to go pick up a bottle. And the rum cask finish is definitely what I'm probably going to be taking home today because this is delicious.
It's good juice.
Yeah.
Thank you for letting us try it. Thank you for sharing your story. We appreciate your time, seriously.
No, thank you for having me. It's
course.
great to be up here in Buffalo.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Right.